Sir, the hull he's cutting, that's a Threnn Dreadnought-class capital ship. And the human? Humming, sir.
The human was humming while he dismantled a warship that had once erased 4 of our colonies in a single afternoon. He did not know this. He did not seem to care. What he cared about, apparently, was whether the scrap metal would fetch a better price if he cut it into smaller pieces first. My name is Grady Tolan, and I tow junk for a living. Specifically, I work the boneyard, a ring of drifting wreckage looping quietly around Earth, left over from some old war before my time. Every morning I strap into my tug, Betsy, pour coffee into a thermos that's survived 3 divorces, and pull hunks of dead metal out of orbit, so the recycling boys at Scrap Heap Station can melt them into rebar. Today's job was Hull 2291, a big lopsided derelict the size of a football stadium, and I had a grapple line on it before I'd finished my first sip of coffee. Ensign Vale Voren did not expect to find anything alive in Earth's debris field. The Cauldron Protectorate Stealth Scout, Hollow Whisper, had slipped into the system specifically because the boneyard was supposed to be empty, a graveyard, not a worksite. So when his sensors pinged a single small vessel drifting alone through 400 derelict hulls, unescorted, unarmed, broadcasting cheerful music on an open channel, Vale assumed it was a malfunction. He ran the scan twice. The reading held. 1 human. No warship. No support fleet. Just humming. Confirmed targeting, Vale said quietly. What is it doing? His sensor officer squinted at the readout. Cutting. Cutting what? The answer came a moment later, and nobody on the bridge liked it. Sir, that hull is 400 meters of layered plating. Standard Protectorate cutting tools would need 11 hours and a support crew to get through that hull. His readout says he's 40 minutes in. Vale made a small, unhappy noise. Is he alone? He appears to be listening to music. Dr. Ivane Mareth had spent 6 years studying the wreckage of the first incursion, back when the Protectorate still called it the regrettable miscalculation instead of the massacre. She'd cross-referenced hull signatures 1,000 times from the safety of an archive terminal. She had never expected to see one live, moving, and being carved apart by a man drinking from a thermos. She pulled the IFF match with shaking hands. Hull 2291 wasn't scrap. It was a Cauldron Dreadnought-class capital ship, one of the 11 that vanished during the invasion 40 years ago, whose wreckage nobody had ever been permitted to recover. That's a dreadnought, she said. That's one of ours. Correction, Vale replied, watching the human whistle a tune while adjusting a cutting laser the size of a bus. That was one of ours. Mareth kept scrolling, and the more she scrolled, the worse it got. Hull 2291 wasn't an isolated case. The catalog tagged behind it, 2288, 2276, 2260, all matched debris from ships the Protectorate's own records still listed as in transit, contact lost. Nobody back home had ever filed a loss report because as far as anyone knew, those ships simply hadn't arrived yet. They had arrived. They had arrived decades ago, and someone had been quietly stacking them in a parking orbit ever since, waiting for a Tuesday with nothing better to do. How many are out there? Vale asked. Total. Mareth didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice had gone very flat. The catalog goes back 400 entries. I stopped counting after that. I got the hull open around mid-morning and radio dispatched that 2291 was a bust, mostly hollow, half its systems lagged, probably military surplus from whatever old war left this junk floating up here. Command was fried clean through, I said, tapping the readout. Somebody really did not want this thing waking back up. Dispatch just told me to log it and move to the next tag. I've hauled 11 of these big lopsided hulks this year alone. They're heavier than the usual stuff, but the tow rig handles it fine once you find the balance point. High Marshal Dorn Caith received the report from Hollow Whisper with the calm of a man who had read it 3 times before letting himself react. 11 dreadnoughts. Recovered in a single year by a single unarmed technician, using equipment that registered on Cauldron scanners as agricultural grade. He asked his aide to repeat the tow beam specifications, certain there had been a translation error. There had not been a translation error. The beam that dragged a ship capable of glassing a continent was rated, according to its own idle hum, for a light salvage. "Define light," Dorn said. Nobody could. What worried Dr. Marath more than the dreadnoughts, once she made herself keep reading, was the growth rate. The boneyard wasn't a static graveyard from one old battle. New wrecks were still arriving, recent ones, some barely a decade old, hull-scarred in patterns that matched Cauldron's stealth scout classes that had gone quietly missing on routine border surveys over the years. Nobody back home had ever connected the disappearances. Nobody had needed to. Earth simply absorbed each attempt, filed it under scrap, and let a man with a thermos deal with the cleanup on his own schedule. "They're not defending the system," she said, hands cold. "They're doing inventory." Vale didn't answer. He was too busy watching the human's tug turn, unhurried, toward Hollow Whisper's actual position. I'll admit the ping caught my eye. Something out past the dreadnought debris was throwing a weird little heat signature, tucked in tight like it was trying not to be noticed, which, fair, half this junk used to be somebody's pride and joy. I ran it against the salvage catalog and got a partial match. Hull profile, drive geometry, even the stealth coding lined up near identical to 4 other, abandoned probes I'd hauled in over the past 2 years. Spec sheet said class whisper type, previously logged non-functional. Made sense. These things never seemed to survive contact with the boneyard for long. "Hey there, little guy," I said into the open channel, mostly out of habit. "I always talk to my toes. My ex says it's a personality disorder. You look salvageable. Let's get you home." I locked the grapple beam. Aboard Hollow Whisper, every alarm the ship possessed went off at once. "He's targeting us," Vale said, voice climbing an octave he didn't know he had. "Evasive." "With what?" the helmsman said. "Our engines can't outrun a tow beam calibrated for a dreadnought." "That's not evasion. That's exercise." Dr. Marath stared at her own console, at the 4 abandoned probes, now cross-matched against Hollow Whisper's own hull class, and understanding arrived all at once, the way cold water does. Every stealth scout the Protectorate had ever quietly lost near the system hadn't been destroyed. It had been collected, filed, recycled into rebar by a man who assumed each one was simply a worse copy of the last. High Marshal Dorn Catha's final order arrived on Hollow Whisper 11 seconds before the grapple beam made contact, and it was shorter than anyone expected. "Power down. Do not resist. Let him tow us." "Sir." "He has hauled 11 dreadnoughts this year without raising his voice," Dorn said. "We are not going to be the thing that finally makes him curious." I got the little probe hooked and reeled in nice and slow, humming the same tune from this morning, and radio dispatched that I was bringing in hull 2292, condition unknown, possibly a newer make given the paint job. Dispatch asked if it needed a hazard flag. I said probably not, these things never put up a fight. Docked it at scrap heap by lunch, filled out the intake form, and went to grab a sandwich, mildly pleased with myself for clearing 2 hulls before noon. Best 2-hull day since March. Somewhere behind me, in a hull he'd catalogued as non-functional, 41 Cauldron crew members sat in total darkness and total silence, waiting to see whether the man with the thermos would notice them before he finished his sandwich. He did not. Back on what was left of the Protectorate border fleet, Dorn Cath filed his report under a new classification he had to invent on the spot, because no existing category covered. Adversary catalogs our warships as a mildly annoying side effect of finding better parking. His final recommendation to the Protectorate High Council was 3 lines long. Do not send another scout. Do not send a fleet. If contact is unavoidable, wave, apologize for the inconvenience, and hope he's already had lunch. I still don't know what that second probe was for. Whatever it was, it powered down nice and quiet the second I hooked it, which I appreciated. Some of these old units groan and spark the whole way in, and I had a sandwich waiting. Anyway, quota's quota. See you all next Tuesday.